Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tidy it up a bit because we've got a heap of excess tissue. So I'm going to get rid of as much of this as possible. So let's just... Okay, what have we got here? We'll have a bit of a look at it anyway. So that is esophagus, which is pretty cool. We don't normally get that. But we're not interested in the digestive system with this, so let's cut all of that away. Now that's where the heart would have attached on. So we have a look. The heart's been removed and they've butchered it a bit, but we can see that the atriums have been taken off. But the atriums are still intact up here. Okay, so what we'll be able to do in a minute is have a look at those and figure out what our pulmonary artery and pulmonary veins are. Let's just get rid of a bit more of this excess tissue around here. So I don't need pretty much any of that. So I'm going to get rid of that first. Alright, now a lot of this is just waste as well. So get that off. Alright, so we'll have a look at the heart and lungs in a second, but we'll come down underneath first up because there's a couple of things we want to have a look at. So we've got some remnants of the diaphragm here, which is pretty cool to see. So that's the muscle that when it contracts pulls down and creates a pressure differential for air to come in, and then when it relaxes it pushes back up and air gets pushed out. Now you'll be able to tell the difference between that muscle and your cardiac muscle and what you'd normally see in your other muscle like steak and stuff like that. Okay, we've also got the liver. Liver's interesting, but for what we're doing it's not important at the moment. There's nothing really too interesting within the structure itself. A few blood clots and things like that, but the tissue itself is pretty consistent throughout. So we're not going to spend any time looking at those. What we're really interested in is the heart and lungs. So we're almost at a stage where we can start having a play with this. I just want to get rid of a bit more of that. Alright, so that's pretty well cleaned up. So what would normally have occurred is this would be attached on here. Okay, so we'd be able to go in through your ventricles, up through your atria with a probe, and figure out, okay, so what's our pulmonary artery, what's our pulmonary vein? Now, what I should be able to do is follow one of these back. So what I can tell here is that is the right atria, the left atria, because it comes back out. And if I use a probe, I can actually pop it out and I can feel it within the lung itself. Okay, so my probe's gone into that side. If I come in through this one, where's that go? So that goes back out and I can actually see it pushing up against the lung tissue. So that's my left atria. And I'm going to assume that this will come out through a vessel. So that would be my right atria. Okay. Now, what I can also see are a couple of arteries here. So I'm going to follow one of those through. And that one's going, I can feel already, that's going through into the lungs. So that one is my pulmonary artery. And if I'm going to have to guess, this one will come out. That's going to be my aorta, which will take blood away to the heart, to the body. So you've still got all your vessels and stuff intact here, which is really cool to be able to see. Like I said, the heart itself's been chopped up fairly badly, but if we have a look, left and right side, so I'm just going to open this up. There's no point messing around with it too much with the state that it's in. But if we open that completely, we're able to see the difference in thickness between the right ventricle walls and the left ventricle walls and the septum. You can see the valves in there that allow or stop blood going back the opposite way. If it was fully intact, we'd be able to have a bit more of a play with it, but we're not going to play too much with that right now. We've already done a heart dissection, so this is what we're really here to have a look at, the lungs. So what we've got, we've actually still got our pharynx attached, which is really cool. I haven't seen one of those before. So we have a look, that's the actual opening. It's actually really cool. Have you seen one of them before?
No.
And that's all cartilage as well. That's super cool to have a look at. Kind of creepy-ish, but really, really cool. It's got a good seal on it too. That's really impressive to see. I'll cut that off and play with it later on if I feel like it. Alright, so let's have a look at our main structures of the, I'm just going to pop that to the side, lung. So we've got our trachea. Our trachea comes down. I'm just going to remove this remaining heart tissue while I'm here, so we don't actually need that for our lung as we go through it. Okay. Trachea comes down, branches off into our bronchi, which will take it to the left and right sides of our lung, and then it branches off into our bronchioles, and then at the end we've got our alveoli. So this wouldn't be too dissimilar to the size of the lungs that we would have. And the reason that we don't just have 2 air sacs is surface area. So we should be able to remember that the surface area of a lung, if we laid out all the alveoli flat for a human lung, would be about the size of a tennis court. And that's because we've got so many small alveoli in there. Alright, now, cool thing about the trachea is you can notice that it holds its shape. It's got these cartilage rings within it, and it's really cool to be able to have a play with. So what I'm going to do is take a section of my trachea off, and I'm going to open it up just so you can actually see. So I'm going to come down along the cartilage rings, and you can actually hear them cutting, which is pretty cool. If you open that up, you can really see that individual pieces of cartilage. Okay, and that gives flexibility within there. Okay, so for an organism's moving around, but it also creates stability within there, because if you think about it, if there's not cartilage rings and you lay down, then there's no structure to it, then that trachea would enclose over. So this basically allows airflow or gas exchange at all times. Okay, it's really cool. So I'd pass that around and let you have a bit of a play with it and have a bit of a feel. I love doing that bit. Alright, so what we're going to do before we go down and start exploring the structures is we're going to inflate the lungs. So we just want to make sure that we've got them nice and spaced out. Okay, now normally we'd have a bit of a plug to stick in, but we're just going to shove the hose down here and see what happens. And we want to create as much of a seal as we can. Hopefully that's not going to be an issue, but we'll find out as we go. So we've got our air compressor going. Okay, probably going to go a bit deeper down here. There we go. Okay, so I'm just currently inflating one side of it because I can't get a decent seal. There we go. Oh, that's good. Okay, we're getting enough of the seal that it's going to inflate both sides reasonably well. So we can actually feel the texture of it, which is really, really cool. You can see as more oxygen or more air comes into it, it doesn't appear as red because the alveoli are filling up with gas. if I was to release the pressure or turn the air off, then it'd be like exhaling. So as we're putting air into it, it's as if we're inhaling. Okay. So we'd be able to have a bit of a feel of that, you know, have a bit of a squeeze. We can also have a look at what happens if we ruptured our lungs. So if I rupture one part of my lung, this side's going to be affected, okay, and I can feel the air coming out of that, but this side's fully operational, okay, so even though half of it's lost some function, you know, it's still able to have or maintain air, which is really cool to be able to see. And I can sort of do a couple more cuts on this side, so on my right lung, and the left isn't affected at all, which is really cool. So I guess now what we want to do is just go down into the lungs itself. So I'm going to take a bit more of the trachea off. Alright. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this down to where it branches off into our bronchus. So I'm probably going to use my scissors for this one, just because cartilage can be a little bit tricky. So we're going to come down into it. Okay, so we can actually see where it branches off to the left and to the right. We've actually got another branch coming off here, which is going into this section of the lung, but these ones are going off into our left and right. If we follow that down, so let's pick on our right side because we've already made cuts here. We can see that our branches get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now we can't see individual alveoli because they're too small. Alright, but what we should be able to do using a probe is follow one of these branches and probably get right down to the tip of our lung. So if we have a bit of a probe down, where are we? Boom, we can pop it out the end, which is pretty cool. So we can see that those bronchioles sort of go the extent of it and end with your alveoli. You've also got your epithelial tissue around the outside just to create sort of a membrane and maintain its shape. The other thing I would do with this at this point is I would look at the difference in tissue between the lung and the heart, because your lung's made up of cardiac muscle, which is quite dense, whereas our lungs are more porous. They've got little alveoli on it. So theoretically, if I've got really dense cardiac muscle and I add it into a beaker of water, it should sink. If I added a similarly sized piece of my lung, as soon as I can get through it, because it's so porous and it's got little air sacs, it's going to float. Now eventually that would sink once all the alveoli filled up with water if they could. Yeah, so we can still actually, even though we've removed part of the tissue here, we can still inflate it. So I've taken some off the top here, so there'll probably be a bit coming out of there in terms of gas, but if I turn this back on and reinsert it down that bronchi, I should still be able to inflate it, which is really cool. And that is what I would normally do in a pluck dissection.